Great.
Welcome, everybody. My name is Mina Jane. I'm the director of the Ashland Public Library in Massachusetts, which is in the US. As I just said, Corrina is in the UK, so she's bringing her own fan base with her for this talk. But I'm so excited to talk to her about her book, her new book that just came out about, it's called I Love Romcoms and I Am a Feminist. And I cannot wait to talk to her about it. Yeah, about the book and her everything about it. So I hope you enjoy chatting with us for the next hour. Before we get started, though, I just want to say thank you to the Friends of the Ashland Public Library for supporting all of our programs. We wouldn't be able to do this fun stuff without them. I'd like to thank Corrina for letting us share this program with other libraries, because when libraries work together, we make magic. And this, I think, will be a very magical program. You can buy signed books by Corrina from Aesop's Fable. I'll put a link to that in the chat, and I will email it out to everybody after the program. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A, which is a button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. This chat is on, and you can all chat with each other, but it sometimes goes by too fast for me to pick up questions. So make sure you put your questions in that Q&A. So Corrina Antrobus is I'm so excited about this. She lives in London. She's a film writer, a podcaster, and founder of the Bechdel Test Fest, which I think is super awesome, a celebration of films that present women in a positive and dynamic light. And so this book is just really, really like, it feels like it could be your catnip. You know, it's the book, the feminism, the rom-coms. You got to watch movies for writing a book. It's amazing. So first of all, welcome. Second of all, tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get into the book and our questions.
Yeah, hello. Oh my gosh, how exciting. Thank you so much, everybody, for zooming in. This is super cool. Yeah, I live in London. I am a film writer, but I'm also a culture lead for my local authority. So I program film festivals and also cultural programs. I have been writing about films for about 10 years or so. I started off doing film marketing for Virgin Media of all places, and that was a great job. And then I got made redundant, and that's really kind of kicked off my more feminist film skew. So whilst I was doing film marketing, I realized how little film marketing was being spent on female-centric films, and that kind of annoyed me. And then being made redundant also annoyed me. So I decided to set up Bechdel Test Fest, which is, being laid off, basically redundant is, so that's when I set up the Bechdel Test Fest. So for those that don't know, the Bechdel test is a very, very low bar measure as coined by Liz Wallace and Alison Bechdel, a fantastic American cartoonist who wrote the cartoon Dykes to Watch Out For. And in 1984, I believe, which makes it the 40th anniversary of the Bechdel test this year, which is also why this book is pretty special as a 40th anniversary nod. But there was a particular comic which had two women going on a date, and one woman said to the other woman, let's go to the cinema. And the other woman says to her, well, the thing is, I only go to the cinema if a film part has these three ticks, and that is that it has to have two women who have a conversation with each other about something other than a man. And it's a very silly but poignant measure. And to think that all a film needs to do to pass would be for me to say to Mina, hi Mina, can you put me on mute? And then it passes. That's hardly a measure of feminism. But the year that I started Bechdel Test Fest, there was less than 50% of the films released into the mainstream that were passing, which was pretty poor. So what I wanted to do was set up a platform that would promote films that pass, not just pass, but with flying colours. And it was great. We did it for 7 years. We programmed festivals all over the UK, and yeah, just had a great time with it. I'm now a mother of a very small two-year-old. Well, he's not very small. He's a normal sized 2-year-old. And funnily enough, running film festivals doesn't quite pay for nursery fees or a mortgage. So I had to put that one to bed for now. But writing this book still gave me the opportunity to do what I love, and that is reading, watching, thinking, championing women in film.
Mm-hmm. Fabulous. And I also know that Alison Bechdel wrote Fun Home, which was a play on Broadway, which is amazing. So my first question is really definition. How do you define feminism? How do you define it?
Oh gosh, wow. In with the big questions. I mean, yes, it is dependent on, well, it's not even dependent. It's equal opportunities, but not just equal opportunities, but equal equity as well. And thinking about what it is that women need to have the same benefits as anybody else, but also thinking about the needs of, like, within the intersectional, thinking about women, because not all women are the same in terms of where they land in this earth. But yeah, I did have a really good answer to this once in a panel, but I am very tired and I can't remember it now. But yeah, I do believe that women should have the same opportunities as men. And it's not about being better than men. It's about, because I do believe that men need to be feminists as well, and they should support us, and in having that equal opportunity. Yeah, and just and looking out for one another and making sure that nobody is suffering just because the fact that they are a woman, or just because that they are a gay woman or a black woman, and just acknowledging that everybody should and does have the right to be on this earth like everyone else. Mm-hmm. Bit of a rambling answer, but yeah.
No, it's good. It's good. Yeah, it's about equality and equity.
Yeah, absolutely.
How do you define a rom-com?
That is an interesting question, because coming across the 100 films within this book, I did have to, let's say, stretch the idea of what a rom-com is. But essentially, whilst there should be a romantic conversation between a romantic narrative, if you take that romantic narrative away, does it still stand up? And if it does, then yes, it's a romantic comedy. I mean, also it needs to be humorous. You need to have a X and a Y person having a romance. And I think what's interesting in this book is that there's so many different variations of what funny is and what humor is. And I've really enjoyed ripping apart what people might think essentially is the typical rom-com, because yes, you got your slapstick and your, kookiness, but something like Phantom Thread, for example, when you look at it through a satirical lens, it's hilarious. And so that's why I've put something like Phantom Thread in there, which I think some people might be surprised at. And then there's also films in there that not a lot of people might have thought about. For instance, 40-Year-Old Virgin, 40-Year-Old Virgin, which is the Netflix film. And essentially, whilst that was billed as a, it's a cool New York black and white fat black woman making her way in the world, trying to find her creative spark. But there is such a beautiful romance in there, and it's funny, and you've got the meet cute, and you've got all these typical rom-com tropes. But I think that's a really interesting one that I've managed to put in the book, because it deserves to be a rom-com. But I think because of the assumptions of, as soon as you call something a rom-com, people switch off. Mm-hmm. It didn't want to lean into that. And I understand that, and I respect that. But I was just like, no, you are a rom-com, and I'm going to hail you as that, because I think it deserves not only to be, I think it actually ups the rom-com credentials by including films such as 40-Year-Old Virgin in there. It's so good. It's such a good film. Like, I do.
All right, everybody. You make sure.
Yeah.
I am going to ask people in the chat to you sort of crowdsource. What are some of their favorite rom-coms? And if they're in the book, maybe we can talk a little bit about how they, if you when you watched them and what you thought of them, and how you pulled out any feminist threads from them. So I'm going to start with When Harry Met Sally. Classic. did you felt like that was a rom-com with a feminist perspective? Why?
So many of the films had so many different things that I could have gone with, but I thought, I mean, when you think about When Harry Met Sally, what do you think about? Cat's Deli, the orgasmic scene. Like, it's just such a staple in the literature of cinema. And it really got me thinking about the importance and how revolutionary it was to have a woman really express and demonstrate what an orgasm sounds like, but and how important that was actually after that. I mean, if you think about that time, it was late 80s. There wasn't that, on that level of mainstream, there wasn't that many people talking about what faking orgasms. And all of a sudden, we were suddenly going, oh, wait, women fake orgasms? I mean, we weren't saying that, we being women, but a lot of men suddenly were like, oh, okay. And it got us talking about it. It got us talking about the concept of orgasms, faking orgasms, and how women can have autonomy over their sexual desires and also do what it is that they need to do to get over that. And while faking orgasms themselves aren't necessarily a feminist thing, because, you know, if you unpick that, then actually it's something that, you know, I mean, that's a whole different kind of conversation. Like, you know, are you saying to a man that you've pleased me when you haven't pleased me? Like, but yeah, there's a whole different conversation. But I think what's so great about that scene is how she completely wipes a smile off Billy Crystal's face, because he just thinks he knows everything about women. He thinks he's got all of them down. He's saying that, oh, I can make women go to animalistic places, and she's just like, oh, really? And then just completely, it's such a great snapback in all the histories of like smugness for a woman, and you just really like, yeah, this is great, well done.
And I think
yeah,
wasn't it his mother that was the woman in the background that said, I want what she's having?
yeah, it was great. And it was Meg Ryan herself, when they were filming that particular scene, it was Meg Ryan herself that said, let's not talk about it, I'm gonna just demonstrate it. And it wasn't planned, and so everybody on the set was like, okay. And then she went with it, and it became this incredible thing. So the fact that Meg Ryan herself was somebody that was like, I'm going to do this, I think this would add volume to and weight to the story, and my character, that in itself, I think, is a great feminist trait, in that it's a woman taking agency over the character that she's playing and then absolutely smashing it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And they often tell you in writing, and I'm not a writer, that to show, not tell. So that had so much more impact because she just did it. She didn't try to convince him verbally that, you know, women can fake orgasms, which I thought was awesome.
Yeah.
So somebody says, how far back did you go in picking films? Because she's thinking about Philadelphia Story, you know, the sort of Katharine Hepburn, Tracy, oh my God.
Yeah.
Tracy. Sort of thing.
Yeah. So I actually went back as far as the 1920s. So there is a silent film era. So there was a silent film called Miss Lulu Bett. And in order to make sure that I had a really good breadth of rom-coms, I lent on so many of my fellow critic friends. And I've got Pamela Hutchinson is a British film critic and programmer here who specializes in silent films, and she and I had some fantastic chats about how great that era was for women in film. You know, you've got, and it's not necessarily seen as like this typical rom-com, but again, it's you have Miss Lulu Bett, who is a spinster in her family home, and she's basically treated like a slave, but then she is swept up with the idea of how a marriage can then elevate her as a woman and give her security, which back in the day, when women weren't necessarily forced, you know, not necessarily having much of a place in the workforce, although they were fighting for that. But what's interesting about Miss Lulu Bett is that it is essentially written by suffragettes. There's a really, it's only a short film. It's actually on YouTube, so anybody can watch it. But there's some really interesting nods into the feminism of the time then, which is where these, I think it's the Lucy something League, and apologies, I forget the surname of the Lucy League, but the Lucy League were championing for the idea that women shouldn't have to lose their surname when they get married. It just didn't make sense to them. Still doesn't really make sense, but you know, for women in the 1920s to be like, you know, campaigning for this, and there's all these jokes about that in the film, which are very telling. And I guess you kind of overlook them unless you realize what it is, that the significance of those films. But yeah, it's the first entry to the book, and it just really helped structure my way of thinking and thinking, okay, well, this is a really good point that I'm trying to make here, that all the rom-coms in here are reflecting the feminism of the time, the mindset and the challenges and the things that women were trying to rise above or make points about. But yeah, so Miss Lulubet is the one that gave women an early lesson in self-respect. And it was written by Zona Gale, who was the first woman to be awarded a Pulitzer Prize for writing as well. So you've got all these like strong women behind it. And yeah, it's fabulous. So yeah, I wanted to make sure that I was going right back to as far as I could go. But yeah, there were so many other silent films in there, but yeah, my publishers were also just like, yeah, nobody's going to have heard of these. So I did have to keep it relatively mainstream. My first list of 100 didn't get past. And they were like, yeah, nobody's going to read this book. I was like, okay. But yeah, so that's how far I went back.
Actually, that brings up a thing, because you said that the rom-com, like what you were seeing was that the rom-coms dealt with issues happening in that time period. So that was 1920s, suffragettes. We were just talking about the Philadelphia story, sort of like the 50s, maybe.
Yeah.
They were dealing with, and the strong women, because we were talking about this before we started, like in terms of directors, there's Nora Ephron, and that I know of, and now, oh my gosh, Barbie, what is her name?
Greta Gerwig.
Greta Gerwig, right?
Yeah.
There's not that many, you know. So like Rob Reiner directed When Harry Met Sally. So, you know, why aren't more women directing these films about women for women?
Yeah, I mean, Rob Reiner was somebody that worked very closely with Nora Ephron to make sure that that was a, you know, her voice is certainly in there throughout. But this is my point about, I mean, going back to Bechtel Test Fest and the patriarchy that is embedded into the film industry, period. I mean, it hasn't always been this way, though. Pre-wartime, there were so many fantastic women that were making films whilst men were out going to war. And then when they came back, as most professions, they got kicked back into the kitchen and the motherhood roles. But yeah, we are getting better in terms of women directors, period, which is good, but we've still got a long way to go in terms of giving women equal opportunities. But then also, I mean, if you really want to go into the culture of making films is hard work, it's long hours, it's unpredictable. And if you want to be a parent, those things don't work. So unfortunately, you do see a high drop-off, or just women that are unable to balance the two. I mean, myself included, as soon as I became a mother, there were so many things that I had to sacrifice in terms of the career that I really want. I can't have the career that I really want because I am a mother now. But yeah, that's okay. It's okay.
Well, yeah, I mean, we do all have to make choices, but on the other side of that, rom-coms really made the careers of certain women. We were talking about this earlier too, was Sandra Bullock and Julia Roberts and Kate Hudson. I mean, there's so many. Renee Zellweger, in the chat, if you can think of any others. Meg Ryan, of course.
Yeah. Jennifer Lopez. But yeah, you do have a lot of women writers in rom-coms as well. So, which I think is where you get the more rich stories, because, and that's not to say that men can't write women's stories, they can, but yeah, there's a lot more solidarity in writing from a place of truth and understanding when you have women on board. Sorry, I think my kid's coming in. When you have women on board and writing behind the scenes. I mean, if you do look at the credits on most of the films that I've referenced, whilst there is a lot of male directors, well, I mean, there's quite a few male directors, most of them will also have a woman director, woman writer, should I say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so there is that, at least.
I think this is an interesting question from Barbara, is because this has all to do with casting, I think, and just completely correct me if I'm wrong, but she says, do you ever consider how American rom-coms often pair a pretty or adorable woman with an ordinary looking man, like When Harry Met Sally? I noticed that British more frequently put more ordinary women in a star role, and I applaud them. It's like more of a comment.
So British films have more. So
that in American rom-coms, usually the woman is really cute, like Meg Ryan,
yeah,
Roberts, and the guy's like, it's all right, like, you know, Billy Crystal. Whoever thought he would be a leading man, right?
I mean, have you watched Billy Crystal recently? Because he was hot. But yeah, I get what you're saying. The jumper. I mean, yeah, yeah. But no, I mean, I think this is it. Meg Ryan, although she's beautiful, there is something about her that is still very normal and accessible, and she wasn't necessarily, I don't know, like aggressively good looking in the way that maybe Barbie has, but then Barbie's kind of leaning into that whole point of being this aggressively attractive woman, this disturbingly attractive woman, should I say? But like, yeah. Yeah, and I mean there is interesting difference between British rom-coms as well. If you think about Richard Curtis and his through line of Notting Hill and Love Actually. Yeah, there's British rom-coms really sort of lean into this idea of what America thinks British men are like, which is the Hugh Grants, you know. And from speaking as somebody that lives in London, there's not that many Hugh Grants knocking around my neighbourhood. But yeah, you know, the very polite, very awkward, very which I think is actually quite interesting, because on the flip side, for American rom-coms, you've got the sort of awkward woman, and like, although she's very cute, you've got this, you know, like very accidentally cute and a bit clumsy, you know. You've got that kind of archetype there. But I mean, you do need two very the essence of a rom-com as well, and this is from Roger Ebert, who's a great film critic, is that it does need to have two very attractive people falling in love. And what I think is interesting now is that we're stretching apart what that idea of attractive is now, and I think for the best, because that is great. It's not just a blonde white woman or somebody that looks like Hugh Grant. We're now thankfully looking at a much more diverse range of representations of beauty, and I think that's why rom-coms are getting better. There was a lull as they got stagnant into the late 2020s, and yeah, I think now that we've got this much more refreshing raft of films which have trans love and black love and gay love, and it's just giving it a new lease of life. Thankfully.
Yeah,
it's so important to have a diverse range of representations of love.
One of my favorite shows recently and books has been Heartstopper. I don't know if you would consider it a rom-com, but I love it. And just for that reason, it just gives life to this couple. But I want to go back to a few things that I'm seeing in the chat. Candace says that there's the U.S. Generally draws a very thick line between Girl Next Door, like Meg Ryan, who is gorgeous. I can't imagine her living next door, but also Bombshell, like Charlize Theron, or
Margot Robbie.
Yeah. So they'll put somebody like I don't know what makes somebody Girl Next Door beautiful.
Cool. Accessible, somebody that you would meet at the water cooler at work or the farmer's market. She might have a fringe. Yeah, somebody that essentially a man can feel like he has a chance with. That's where I think rom-coms, particularly in the 2000s, shall I say, were trying to reach this archetype of girl next door that you could potentially reach. It's not this unimaginable complete fantasy world, which, I mean, they've got porn for that, so that's a whole different conversation. But yeah, I mean, if you're thinking about 500 Days of Summer, for example, that was such an interesting film that really was the cookie cutter of the girl next door and the kind of girl that the guy would want. And I think this is a really interesting portrayal.
Was that Drew Barrymore?
No, that was Zooey Deschanel.
Oh, that's right.
Zooey Deschanel, yeah. And I'm not sure if you guys have heard of the trope, the manic pixie dream girl, who is essentially a trope that has been born out of rom-coms, and that is a character that essentially just lives to serve the desires and validate the desires and quirkiness of a man, and therefore it comes across as something that is quite ridiculed, but of course she is great because she makes a man feel completely validated. But 500 Days of Summer was one of the rom-coms that I put in the book because it flipped the manic pixie dream girl on its head, and it was essentially the revenge of the manic pixie dream girl, because you've got the guy who is essentially everything that Zooey Deschanel's character Summer is a figment of his imagination. And it's she loves his music, she likes the kind of clothes that he wants her to wear, but as this film goes on, you realize that everything that is so great about her is all in his head. And yes, she's actually just a normal woman. This is the importance of a rom-com that is saying women are just women, and they're gonna be normal and women, and they're not there to just fulfill your desires, and they're not there just to like the same kind of quirky music you like, because that's not reality. And you have to be prepared for a person to be individual, male or female. You can't let anybody put anybody on a pedestal, essentially, because it is only going to lead in disaster when you just think that somebody is going to be this perfect person, because perfect doesn't exist.
Right.
But yeah, I think 500 Days of Summer was one that at first I thought, oh, I got a problem with this, and then I unpicked it. It's like, actually, this is a parody. This is a parody of, and it's a warning to anyone, men or women, of fictionalizing perfection. Creating a perfected idea of what somebody should be, because they don't exist.
So Judith reminds me that when I said Drew Barrymore, I was thinking about 50 First Dates, because that's also the turn of that thing, because this guy has to convince this woman that they love each other every single day.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, yes, this is it. I must admit, 50 First Dates is not in the book. Drew Barrymore is great. She's so great, but there are some of the rom-coms that she is in is like Never Been Kissed. I just found too creepy. I was like, wait a minute,
because he thought she was
a teacher.
Like,
I don't know. So some just didn't like. Cool, enjoy them, but in terms of a feminist lens, no, it's failing.
I am getting so Candace wrote this thing about that after leap year, it felt like rom-coms just went downhill, both in quality and, I mean, I'm paraphrasing Candace, but again, let me know if I'm wrong, but they kind of went downhill, and you know, like there was like this sort of dearth of good rom-coms in the
Mm.
2000s, early 2000s. So she's wondering if there were good rom-coms at that time from your perspective, ones that did have that deeper storyline that was feminist and that could speak to women.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was an interesting time because I think this was where, if you know what the phrase "jumping the shark" is, it just realized that rom-coms were doing so well in the late 90s, early 2000s that they just got churned out without actually thinking about the integrity of them, and they were just like, oh, what's the, you know, AI wasn't exactly there then, but it was as if AI had just created a bunch of stockpile stuff and ticked,
They were very
like Blonde Woman, yeah, completely formulaic. But I mean, you've got okay. You start 2000s with Legally Blonde, for example, which is huge. Like, it was one of the biggest rom-coms ever, and that was a really interesting one because it turns the blonde stereotype on its head and showed that actually women who are blonde, surprise, surprise, might actually have brains under there as well. And you know, the blonde women obviously got a really good snapback, and that was an interesting story because that was actually written by a blonde woman who went to a law school and realized how patronizing everyone was to her and how mean people were to her, and she actually dropped out and wrote Legally Blonde, which I think is such a great story and such a great like snapback at all of that. But yeah, well, what else is in there? So, well, the early 2000s as well, and this is what's interesting about Black rom-coms. There was such a great line of rom-coms that had Black characters in them, but because they featured Black characters, they weren't considered rom-coms, they were considered Black films. So therefore got completely sidelined from the whole genre, which I think is pretty sad because some of my favorite films were majority Black cast. And that's where my love of rom-coms came from, by seeing this wonderful range of films that had Black, affluent, loving, complex relationships with one another that you just didn't see anywhere else because racism. And in the UK, we had Bend It Like Beckham, which came out in 2022, which is still like one of the best films. And, you know, it's very treasured here in the UK. I hope over you guys as well. But like, for example, the BFI are about to do a whole celebration of Bend It Like Beckham in particular. But that as a film about a young Asian woman who likes football, it's probably gay as well. That's like the sub story, but it wasn't like the time to kind of talk about that in case it got sidelined as a whole different thing. But yeah, but Bend It Like Beckham, absolute treasure. Love Jones was 97. Let me see what else there is. Oh, My Big Fat Greek Wedding was 2002. Like, incredible film. That was such an important film in the rom-com canon in terms of like that has so much feminism behind and in front of the camera in terms of this Greek woman who decided we never see Greek love, Greek representations. And I'm going to put myself, Nia Vandalis, to put herself in the film, write the film. She even crowdsourced money to be able to put it on. And then Tom Hanks got involved and like, yeah, anyway, it's the story behind My Big Fat Greek Wedding is incredible. And it's still, I think, to this day, the highest grossing rom-com of all time. And what I've written about that film in particular is the makeover scene. I mean, what's a rom-com without a makeover scene, right? But that makeover scene for this film was so empowering because it wasn't about him, it was about her. And it wasn't just about her looks, it was about her brain, because she wasn't just learning how to put on eyeliner and educating herself to give herself self-esteem. And what's more attractive than somebody that has confidence? And it was such a, yeah, that's a really empowering one as well. So early 2000.
And also not the tagline for that movie, but there was something about it where it said like my big fat Greek wedding, and then it would cross it out and say Indian, and then it said Italian, and then it said Jewish, and then it said, so it was like it was something that so many people could relate to, not just the couple, but the families, well, the Greek family that was, and I was like that, it totally like was like, oh, that could be an Indian wedding for sure. But wasn't this also the time of the rise of J-Lo, where she was doing Manhattan and there's like so many, I can't.
Yeah. Made in Manhattan is such an interesting one as well. And this has got a special place in my heart, and it's also in the book as well, because this was director, oh my God, my brain's someone, Wang, and he really injected his idea of intersectionality and solidarity for people of color. Because if you watch that film through that lens, all the people that are working together are women, people of color. They've all got like 2 jobs. They're working really hard. They help out the childcare, and they're just trying to get by in this very white world. And it's a Cinderella story, which of course, and I mean, J-Lo is just so fantastic as well, but it's also looking at her through a slightly meta lens as well, because she was like one of the most amazing pop stars at that time as well.
It was
in terms of fame.
Wayne Wang.
Yeah, Wayne Wang, yes, of course. Who's a really interesting director, but and it wasn't going to be him at first directing it, so it would have been a completely different film. But then for him to come on board and actually put through his lens of, actually, these are immigrant women and they deserve to shine, and they're looking after one another, and it's like workers. There's like so much like workers' rights behind there as well. Even so, there's like little nods between like the self-awareness of the thing that's going on about J-Lo in real life, how much people were looking at the size of her behind, and there's all these like little nods to that in the film, which I think is really smart, because she was being objectified, and here was this opportunity through this film to just snap back at it, and I think it was really clever in that way. But yeah, J-Lo's great. I mean, what was her last film? Marry Me. I don't know if anybody's seen Marry Me, but it's so fun. It's so fun. And again, here she is being completely true to herself and her heritage. There's so much of her world in there that she is now unapologetically bringing forward into this, what is seen as a white space. And yeah, more power to J-Lo.
I had forgotten about Katherine Heigl with the 27 Dresses. Adorable movie. But I want to go back to what you had said about the early 2000s and the Black films that were not being called rom-coms. What were some of the ones that you really enjoyed, so we can look them up and watch them and enjoy them too?
Yeah, so Love Jones, one of my absolute favorite films. And this is Nia Long and Lorenz Tate, who are just beautiful, beautiful people, and sexy and soulful. And yeah, I mean, Nia Long is essentially the Meg Ryan of the Black rom-com world. Like she's so cute, and she's so interesting, and she's so quirky and funny, and yeah. Black the Best Man. The Best Man is incredible, because again, you've got these three men, 3 women, was it even more? But yeah, just like an affluent, sexy people having all these backstories, and they're intertwining, and it's just so funny. Watermelon Woman is another one that's a little bit more of a niche one. So that is Cheryl Dunye, who is a Black lesbian filmmaker, and this is one of the first rom-coms that was made by a Black lesbian filmmaker. And it's really interesting because it's essentially looking at why Black women's stories don't get told, but through this really sweet comical, and it's such a great 90s film. You've got like the 90s fashion, and it's just like they're working blockbuster, and it's so cute. Boomerang is actually one of my favorite ones as well, and this is the first studio film to be released with a all-black cast, with Eddie Murphy headlining. Headlining, it's not a music act, you know, leading. And Boomerang was fantastic, but it's really interesting to look at it through today's lens, because you look back at the reviews that were coming out, they were really infused with a lot of racism, because essentially critics at that time, which were majority white, and critics have historically been majority white and male, which is why a lot of rom-coms don't get the love that they should. Yeah, a lot of the critics, and there's a like, it's still online today from the New York Times, I think, but it's essentially looking at it, saying that it can't get its head around the fact that there are these black rich people having a normal life, and they call it a retrograde fantasy, I think, which is just, it's like when you pick that apart, it's like, what does that mean? What does that really mean? But Boomerang is fantastic.
It kind of reminds I'm sorry, it kind of reminds me of what people said when Crazy Rich Asians came out, and they were like, I didn't know Asians could be that rich.
Yeah. Crazy Rich Asians is so important as well in that respect. I mean, that was one of the, I think that's still in the top 10 most lucrative rom-coms to ever have been released in terms of box office.
Really,
and yeah, and anything written by Terry McMillan as well. So Waiting to Exhale, How Stella Got Her Groove Back. And She's Got a Habit is a rom-com by Spike Lee, and that's a really interesting one to think about. I mean, you don't normally think about Spike Lee doing a rom-com, but essentially, again, it is about a black woman, well, a woman having romantic relations with different people, and you know, it's got its problems in the terms that the rape scene, and it's really interesting to read back on Spike Lee himself answering to that scene and saying, yeah, that was, I don't know what I was doing, that was wrong. But he's, through the TV series, he's tried to kind of make amends. But essentially what we're looking at with She's Got a Habit is, for the first time, we have a black woman with agency about her sexual desires, taking her pick from guys that just can't handle the fact that she doesn't want to belong to one person. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. I want to go back to
yes, Brown Sugar. Definitely Brown Sugar. Sorry, I was just looking at the
and the soundtrack for Love Jones. Awesome.
Oh my god. Well, yeah, the soundtracks to a lot of these films were the first entry point for me as well, because I didn't really go to the cinema that much, and we didn't have that much access to American films unless I went to my friend's house and they happened to have Sky or a DVD player, which we didn't have in my house. We just couldn't afford those kind of things. So yeah, that's a whole different story. But yeah, it's great.
I do want to ask you about the progress of a rom-com through the lens of feminism, because most people sort of think that rom-coms are about a woman looking for a man and getting that man however way they do it. But I look at them very differently. Like, I find them to be where women kind of figure out who they are and figure out what man will fit into their life versus, you know, like, I'm going to make my life, as you said, the pixie, whatever. So what do you think is about that? Like, I don't, I mean, like, it makes me mad when people are like, oh, they just want a guy.
So, yeah, I mean, bad rom-coms will just do that. But and this is the point, when they're done right, they show the complexities of where a relationship sits in terms of the checkpoints of anybody's life. And as I'm getting older and I go through different things, so, you know, university, first loves, buying a house, getting married, having a kids, all of those things, rom-coms are so good at growing with you. And as long as there should be enough adequate representations of those particular points in your life to show, because we all fall in love and we are going to have a decision whether we have kids or not at some point. Some of us might be older when we have kids, and it's like some of the rom-coms in here, I think, you know, they straddle IV conversations, not having kids conversations. And I think through the platform of a rom-com, it can really add depth to and complexity to those stories and make people feel seen and have some sense of catharsis. Rom-coms in the 80s are really interesting to me because you've got women finally entering the workforce at a more significant rate and actually being the boss, you know, getting into the boardroom. So things like Baby Boom, which more straddles the idea of having a kid and being a boardroom kind of person, which really got me, by the way. I was in tears by that one because it was very like fitting for my life at that point, because I was just like, oh my God, this is actually what I'm going through right now. Not that I was like that rich and wearing shoulder pads, but yeah, there was elements of that got me. But Working Girl, for example, is so good. But Broadcast News, which is one of my favorite films ever, because you've got the rom-com is the backdrop, but what essentially in the 80s rom-coms in particular is women realizing that the romance is the most important thing, and they are having careers as well, and where does a man fit into that, as opposed to how do I get a man? And wanting love and marriage and a relationship period is not something to be embarrassed about. We all need connection. So yeah, the romantic comedies that are able to accept that and not ridicule it and show the complexities and the complications of that are the best ones.
What was
and this is, I mean,
what film are you talking about?
So Working Girl
in
particular. Yeah, Working Girl. Waitress in a way as well. Waitress is an interesting look at becoming a mother. Yeah.
Okay. What is JD asked, what's the difference between the early rom-coms and screwball comedies?
So screwballs, I mean, it's the style, it's the velocity of, it's the kinetic energy of the two people just battling it out. And that really, I mean, that is really where rom-coms first started to be seen as rom-coms, in the way that silent films didn't necessarily fit into rom-coms because they were just silent films, because it's like, well, they're not talking. It's the same as like black films, like, well, are they? But you know, there are subsections within those mis-genre categorizations. But the screwballs and the comedies of remarriages are such an interesting time to look at. So you think about films that are essentially before the pre-code era. So in the pre-code was when there was a certain set of rules that were set by the government, essentially, to say that you can't have too many things that could potentially, infiltrate the nation. Like, you can't put things like the basic stuff, like you can't have killings, and you can't have people that are committing crimes and getting away with it. It's like a morality measure, if you like. But adultery was one of them, as was interracial relationships, being gay, anything like that just wasn't ever allowed. So the comedies of remarriages were really interesting, because whilst you couldn't show adultery, you could show somebody breaking up, doing whatever it was with somebody else. Obviously, this wasn't explicitly shown, and innuendo was such an important part of that era. So the remarriage was breaking up, going away, but then coming back. So that was their way of showing that they're not breaking the rules, but they kind of are. They were so cheeky. I mean, Katharine Hepburn films are perfect for that. Bringing Up Baby is just so full of innuendo. It's incredible. And it's so funny because of that. You're just like, oh my God, she's chasing a guy who is looking for a missing bone. It's like, come on. It's just, and he's trying to look for her, and they're both looking for a missing pussycat. So
I'm going to I have a couple more questions, but Paula has asked about middle-aged women, because I know Mamma Mia is in the book, and it's so fun. Something's got to give. Do you do that in rom-com? I mean, that was so heavy, I thought.
Something's got to give. Yeah, that's a rom-com. I mean, it's heavy, but then there's a buoyancy in there. There's humor in there for sure. And I think it's one of those films where you've got to laugh at how awful life is sometimes. But yeah, middle age rom-coms are super important as well, because again, you don't get enough adequate representations of people that are over the age of 25 falling in love, as if we no longer have sex drives, or we just get married and live happily ever after. So one of the films that has a dear place in my heart is Good Luck to You, Leo Grand. And that has Helen Mirren, and it's a British film. Came out 4 years ago. British film. Helen Mirren is an older woman. Her husband has passed away, and she's confessing that she's basically had a life of unfulfilled sex life. So she hires a male prostitute, a male sex worker, and it's so beautiful because she's just opening up to this person about what it is that she wants, but she's at first afraid to ask. And I kind of don't want to ruin it, but the last scene is just so beautiful. You've finally got this older woman who is just laying herself bare. And what's interesting as well is that it's her that is the person that is able to give her the climax that she wants and deserves. And it really addresses the fact that you have sexual desires into your older years, and you don't have to be embarrassed about them. And yeah, it's very, very, it's very funny. But yeah, Helen Mirren.
What was the name of that film?
Good Luck to You, Leo Grand.
Good Luck to You, Leo Grand. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. So I'm going to ask you a very, very difficult question that came up earlier.
Emma Thompson, of course. Sorry, not Helen Mirren. Do you know I always do that?
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Emma Thompson, which is terrible because I was actually talking to her about this book. Yeah, Emma Thompson. British.
It's so funny. Okay.
Sorry, I'm very tired.
No, it's okay. Marcia asked much earlier on, and I'm going to limit this to 5. But what are your 5 favorite rom-coms?
Broadcast news. Yeah, Holly Hunter, just absolute space in my heart for that woman. She is able to emit passion and neuroses and intelligence in a way that I don't know how anybody else can. She's got such a rage that I understand. And broadcast news is just so fantastic in terms of how well she is working in the workspace, and how rampant she can be. Because that used to be me, basically working. I'm just and people just workaholic, Love Jones. I talked about Love Jones as well. The soundtrack, the beauty of it, just the vibe of it. You just got these smoky bars and these poetry scenes and this lovely people coming together. Boomerang, I've mentioned. Rye Lane, and I don't know how much you guys have heard of Rye Lane over in the US, but Rye Lane came out 2 years ago, I think, and it's such a typical rom-com, but it was revolutionary in that it's got 2 black leads, and they're so cute and so funny, and it really leans into the fact that it's a rom-com. There's no apology to it. You've got your meet cute, you've got your singing, dancing thing, you've got the point where he disappoints her and she's got to get him back, and it's just so cute and so funny. So yeah, Ryan Lane, I have massive respect for that one, because it's not trying to be anything but a romantic comedy, but the fact that it is all black cast in a very recognizable part of London. Yeah, I just love it. It's authenticity. Heathers, which I think is a really interesting one. Again, I've put this through the lens of gaslighting. I think Heathers is Rye Lane was, I just saw in the chat, is R-Y-E Lane. Yeah, Heather's is, I mean, I love Winona Ryder. Who doesn't? You know, she's fantastic. And there's so many different iterations of the film Gaslight, which is in that as well. Is that 5? Have I said 5?
That was 5. That's amazing. Nothing that I would have expected, though. Interestingly,
Yeah. I've just seen Notting Hill. I've recently watched again. I actually did an introduction for that recently, and that's great. It's such a quintessential British one as well, you know. So, yeah.
How did you pick 100 films? Like, how did you have like films and you had to cut it down to 100?
With great difficulty. With great difficulty. And my publisher was just like, oh, let's do 100. I was just like, can we do 40? And they're like, no, 100 is such a nice round number. I was like, okay. But then by the time I'd done 100, I was just like, oh my God, there are so many others that I want to explore. And because I just assumed that so many weren't ever going to make the book because I thought they were bad, or I assumed, they're just a Drew Barrymore, like it's going to be rubbish. But then doing the research and watching again, I was just like, actually, this has got some weight to it. This is really saying something. And I'm not writing another one anytime too soon. But if there was another one, there is another 100 to write about. But in order for them to be in the book, first and foremost, that I needed to know that I would have screened it as part of my film festival. So if I could confidently say, yeah, I would screen this film and talk about it and applaud it, that was one of the credentials for me. If it was pushing the genre forward, as opposed to just falling into the stereotypes, you know, if the female character had autonomy, if there was a journey that she was going on that we could get on board with, and even if you've got the assumption of her being a one-dimensional character, how does she unpack that character and make us see that she's more than that? Mm-hmm. Those were the things for me. As long as they had great dynamic women, not just in front, but ideally also behind the camera, to say that this film is trying to say something about the female experience and how important it is that this thing called love that we all go through affects our lives and how it, you know, changes our minds and on things, then yeah, it's... And also, if it made me cry, if I got goosebumps, if I was watching it, I was like, well, it's done its job. You know, rom-com is supposed to also move you. Mm-hmm. You know, and never underestimate the feelings that you get when you watch love. It's, you know, let's just boil it down to it. Love is all.
Oh, that's amazing. Okay, last question. If you had your wish, what director, actor, and actress would you put together for the next rom-com?
Oh my God, what a great big question. I mean, Holly Hunter, I'd watch her make breakfast. Director Greta Gerwig. I think she's incredible. I think she's just incredible. Like, after watching Barbie and Frances Ha, which is also one of my favorite films, she's just got it right in this way that is so accessible, and she's messy and intelligent and normal and smart, and yeah, I think Greta Gerwig could certainly direct. Or Nia Long. It's going back to but Angela Bassett as well. Angela Bassett is just incredible, and she's got such depth. And she's the lead in How Stella Got Her Groove Back, mm-hmm. And also Waiting to Exhale. Her setting the car on fire in Waiting to Exhale is just like classic, absolute iconic. You know, yeah. And yeah, has that answered it?
Who's the guy?
The guy.
Or the love interest. I don't want to say guy. Could be Could be anybody.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. I mean, I do love watching Greta Gerwig as well. She is also one of my favorite actresses. But I'd like to see her do something. I mean, she's done quite samey things.
So I'm gonna say I would put Angela Bassett and Viola Davis together.
I mean, that's not even fireworks. That's like bonfire night. But yeah,
you can tell us who you think too. I just was like, as soon as you said Angela Bassett, I was like, ooh. I just what was it, the something the
I have to click through. Who else? Yeah, that's a really good question. It's going to bug me, and I'm going to be like, that's who I should have said before. But yeah, it's great. Kristen Stewart, I thought, was actually really interesting actress. She's in Happiest Season, which was the first lesbian Christmas rom-com, and it's a bit silly, but it's so fun. And I think Kristen Stewart is such an interesting character as well. It's like she's really leaning into her sexuality and just making sure that everybody knows that she's a lesbian, and deal with it. Like, good for you. Good for you.
Well, we are actually out of time. This is
wow.
I know it's flown by. Flown by. Thank you so much, and I am going to totally recommend your book to everybody here because rom-coms. Read it if you have book recommendations and a really good perspective on why we should love them. So I hope everybody gets to read it. And Corrina, I look forward to whatever comes next for you.
Yeah, gosh knows. Well, right now it's bed because it's 8 o'clock. Well, it's putting the little one to bed. So yeah. Well, but thank you so much. I really appreciate having the time to talk about this passion of mine, and I really hope that you will go and look at some of the other rom-coms that I've mentioned. And yeah, if you've got any more that you think I should be thinking about, please, I'm online. I'm easy to find. Drop me a line. I'd love to hear from you.
Awesome. I think you're gonna get inundated. Because there's so many. Anyways, have a wonderful day and evening. And for everybody who's here, thank you so much for being here. And just the chat has been fantastic. So I hope you all have a good weekend and watch lots of fun movies while you're at it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Good night, everybody, or goodbye.